Welcome, everybody. Melody's program was the first casualty of the COVID-19 pandemic. She was supposed to be doing it when all of everything shut down. So we're very happy to have her back today to give us her talk on the history of the Second Congregational Church. I'm sure it'll be fascinating.
Oh, you are?
Take it away.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Since most of you go to this church, okay, let's see, this little green light's supposed to come on. And there it is, okay. So let's start out at the beginning. So as you can see here in the beginning, the church was formed in 1887, and they had a lot of things to say in order to do this. There were 24 charter members of the church, and so you might recognize some of the names, but do remember this was 1887. So there was a Mark French and a Mr. and Mrs. Alonzo, A-L-O-N-Z-O. No? Alonzo, there you go, Griswold. Mr. and Mrs. Harvey Varnum, Mr. and Mrs. Gurdon Lease, Mr. and Mrs. George Burnham, Henry Raymore, Mr. and Mrs. William Patton, Mr. and Mrs. William Buchanan, he was the clerk, Joseph Mellandy, Mrs. George Powell, Mrs. Charles Ober, and Mrs. Levi Atwood, Mrs. R.L. Flagg, Mrs. Charles Bucher, Mrs. David Griswold, and Mrs. Charles Holmes, and Miss Elsie C. Raymore, and Miss Lucy M. Seeley. They were the 24 that formed the first church. And this was our first home. The brick meeting house was built during 1827 at the Center Village. The Vermont Historical Gazetteer says this is a union house and was built by the united efforts of the Baptists, Methodists, and Universalists, and has a good organ. That's what it said, it was quoted. It housed the Second Congregational services until the new church was built in 1889. So in 1889, the new church was built where it is now, on the site of the former Chadwick House, which burned in 1885. The cost of the lot and building was $3,600 and paid for entirely by subscriptions and no outside funds. The whole town took pride in the new house, dedicated free of debt, on October 22nd, 1889. Over 300 attended the afternoon service, taxing the new house capacity, which was followed by an evening service. A large memorial window filled the front, given by the children of Norman Atwood. The new church featured a large bell with an inscription stating it was made in West Troy, New York, number 1902, for the Howard Clock Company. It was saved from the 1993 fire and replaced in the new building. The weather vane, which doesn't show very well in this picture, I guess that he blew it up a little bit. The weather vane, which sat on the top of the steeple, was placed by the grandfather of Stub Wells and was refurbished in 1990, while the tower was being restored, at which time the original green steeple was painted white. Sometimes I look at it and it looks moldy to me, but it's not. It's just green under the white, just in case anybody thought that. It was mostly destroyed in the fire, and David Albright created a replica, but he kept the original directional letters. The original clock faces were built by Stubbs' grandfather, though many helped with the restoration during the 1990 project. The clock originally came from the E. Howard Clock Company. Prior to the 1993 fire, it required bi-weekly winding, and Gene Jankaskas was the last person to hold the job and received a stipend of $4 a week. It was quite a task, which I'm sure she'd be willing to tell you about. This is our parsonage. It was the first parsonage. It was built in 1891 on land donated by H.W. Varnum on Main Street with a debt of $250. It was sold in January 2011 due to the need of costly repairs. And you all remember, no, maybe not personally, but you all remember reading about the flood of 27. As the papers said, at the dark, the rain began increasing. Its downpour to sheets and continued all through Thursday night. Friday was cold and gray, still raining. Part of the Morrisville Dam had gone out. Reverend Guy L. Margison, having come from York State in January of 1927, was a true hero during this time. The doors of the parsonage were thrown open to sick and needy, whom they tenderly cared for and supplied with food. No mention of damage to the church or parsonage was found. I need more hands. So this is an interesting picture here. I got this picture from Mary Wells Coburn, Stubbs' daughter, and it is of Reverend Henry G. Howard. He was pastor from 1893 to 1907. And the vintage beard in this picture is one you don't see very often. So I looked it up. There's a whole thing on the internet about the beards and the ages. So on the internet, it showed that the late 1800s to early 1900s, this was the type of beard they wore, but none of the pictures I saw were as long as this one. So I think he was a little bit over the top. So the original of this, I just donated to the Historic Society, so we'll know where it is in the future. In 1966, the churches, the Cambridge Church and the Jeffersonville Church, split into their own churches. So there was a lot of literature out there about that, but I'm going to tell you what the official minutes said. This was put, I think, in the paper. At the annual meeting of the Cambridge Church, the deacons of the church proposed that the Cambridge Church break its ties with the Jeffersonville Church and proceed as an autonomous church of its own. Reasons given were: 1, the town is growing rapidly enough to support 2 active Protestant churches. 2, we could respect and cooperate more satisfactorily with the church in Jeffersonville if we were neighboring autonomous churches. And 3, we suggest a trial plan for a limited time when each would stand alone, after which a reappraisal would be done by each church to determine future possibilities. I need to say this is really a polite way of putting it, because the information I read was not quite that friendly. You probably know this lady. This hangs on the wall at the church. This is a picture of Dorothy Chase. Yes. Dorothy Smith. I got Chase coming up, though. This is Dorothy Smith. And it was really hard to find a picture of her, so we took it off the wall and they scanned it in. In 1971, construction began on addition to the church house, adding classrooms and office space, as well as additional room for receptions. This was all due to the generous bequeathing of Dorothy Smith, who was a very community-minded individual and is locally famous for her many roles in the community, including her many years as town clerk. She went on to meet her maker in 1965. The Cambridge Food Shelf. You can't live in town and not know about the Cambridge Food Shelf. They believe it started back in 1986 on a by-appointment basis. Today, they occupy the basement of the church with elevator access and have regular hours. And I believe those hours now are Tuesdays, 1 to 7. As well as they would meet emergency needs. It is run independently of the church and managed by a multitude of wonderful volunteers. It has grown exponentially as the need has increased. During COVID, when the church was not open to the public and was only giving services on Zoom, we were able to open our community room to the food shelf, so they were able to go in there and set up their supplies for needs, to meet needs. They have been very conscientious of the COVID situation. The fire. 5 a.m., March 27th, 1993, the cry went out, the church is on fire. A devastating time for our community. Fire departments from Cambridge, Johnson, Morrisville, Waterville, Essex, and Underhill responded to the call, but little could be done to save this 108-year-old building. Though the structure remained standing, the inside was gutted, as you can see in the photo album I left in my car. It was believed the fire started when some teenagers came to the church and lit the candles, but did not extinguish them before leaving, and there'll be more about the fire. So the UCC insurance covered approximately 90% of the estimated cost to rebuild, with donations and fundraising making up the remainder. The architect of the new church was Ann Vivian. It was her first church, and she's done several since then. An elevator to reach all 3 floors and a sprinkler system were required. A new PA system and handicap entrances for both levels. Hearing aid devices and wheelchairs were added. Changes were made to the location of the aisles. When I got married there 52 years ago, they had 2 aisles. I never quite figured that out. Now there's only 1, so it makes sense. And they have 1 aisle just in the center. Also, the more lighting was needed. A small chapel in the entranceway was added. As you can see, that little jut-out thing with the round window there, and it still exists. Oops, front doors were a problem. They weren't big enough to let in a casket, so that had to be fixed. And then there was replacing, there were issues with the roof and no overhang, causing some icing issues. And many of the new systems, heating, elevator, sprinkler system, have required expensive repairs, and as the church treasurer, I will attest to that. Yes, we know currently there is no bells and no music. Do we have bats in our belfry? I don't know. I'm not going up there. But we do have a couple of Batmen who are working on the project, and that is Winston Ainsworth and Larry Wyckoff, and so we are aware of it. The rebuilding of the new church began in January of 1994 and was completed for their first service on June 27th and opened for business. The dedication was held later on October 19th. Many of you knew this lady or knew of this lady. This is Ruth Nealon Chase, and she was once Vermont's oldest resident. She was born on October 28, 1889, the same year the church was built. She was always proud to point out her father, Elmer, had been a cowboy who rode with Buffalo Bill Cody. Elmer moved his family to Vermont in 1893. In 1909, at the old age of 20, Ruth married Harold Cutting Chase. In 1914, they purchased their home on Main Street in Jeffersonville at the unbelievable price of $2,500. And that's where you'll see Essence now. And they also purchased the building next door, which now houses the law offices. Ruth was well known for her handyman quilts, doilies, afghans. She had a passion for flower gardens, and she was an avid fisherwoman. She had an adopted son, Warren, and a grandson named Jack S. Chase, which probably many of you have heard of. He has a sculpturing business in Underhill. I'm not sure if he's retired or not. So he was Ruth's guardian. So he designed and produced a stainless steel Christmas ornament, which depicted her church, our church, and later one of a hummingbird. The profits from the sales of each ornament went toward the care of Ruth so she could stay in her home, which was her greatest desire. Ruth lived to be 107 years old, and the remainder of the unsold ornaments were donated to the church and have since been sold out. You've seen this probably at the front of our church and maybe not known what it meant, but this was put up for October 26, 2016. Our church received the Congregational designation of open and affirming, and basically this means that all are included, the LGBTQ, which I always have a hard time saying, in the church's life and ministry. So a little more about the current church. The church not only houses the food shelf and clothing bank, we also open our doors to AA meetings, RSVP bone builder classes, Cub Scouts, and community lunches. Tomorrow, Valerie Valcour will be presenting a program at the church on identifying and removing ticks at 5:30. Our pastor, Reverend Devin Thomas, likes to be called Rev Dev. I think that I'm not sure why he wants to be old. That makes him sound young, I guess. Serves us as a quarter-time pastor and also serves half-time in Hyde Park and quarter-time in Bakersfield. We're going to have a film to watch, and in the film you're about to see, you might see a younger version of yourself or people who are no longer with us. It was compiled from VCR tapes taken by Sue Perry, which was a very heavy machine to hold for many days. And I took those tapes and I converted them to DVDs a few years ago. And then the DVDs were given to Irving Payne, who generously offered to condense them into this shortened version. The DVDs are available to purchase at $5. Sue was supposed to be here, and I was going to let her narrate this, but it's pretty self-explanatory.
Oh, it's really, really bad. I'll try to get as much as I can. Comes the Morrisville Fire Department with a big ladder. Look at that. Huh.
I bet it's full of sand.
What's it got in it, Les?
I wouldn't be surprised if that's where they doused their cigarettes. When they were winding it up. So take a breath, that was your cigarette.
And there's Weldon.
Remember, the church burnt in March of '93, so we're moving forward here with the dismantling. I'm not going any further. I just breaks my heart.
Yeah, but you can see why.
Sure.
So the fumes is
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
As many of the windows as possible could be saved, and those that weren't, they collected the stained glass and used them for some windows inside the church.
It's stuck at the top.
I believe that's Ernest Crush doing this work.
Oh, I see. They got the ropes, see, holding up this end. Stone Cold. My goodness, we've got big potatoes, big butt.
Why don't we leave outside for the committee and everybody else can sign on this side? Let me,
People signed the inside, was this of the
Yeah, sometimes.
bell tower?
Finishing on the door. Something or other here.
I believe it took 14 tries to get the steeple to get up there and stay in the right position. Sue could tell you for sure because she stood there and watched all of it. And then there are some young people here. They were young back in 1994 that you might recognize that came to watch the show. There was a little problem there. They put the wrong date on that. It was later fixed.
Good morning.
It was freed up.
but you're excited, aren't you?
So that is what we have to offer you today. So I'm glad you all came and learned a little bit about our church. You're welcome anytime. Our services are from 10 to 11 on Sunday morning. Thank you.